Hello, my passage for this evening is Mark chapter 10, verses 42 through 45. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." The theme of this passage is that in order to be great, you must be a servant. And Isaiah had foretold 700 years before Jesus' birth that he would be a suffering servant, that Jesus would embody the very nature of a servant. He was lowly in stature, lowly in possessions and appearance. He had nothing that would draw men towards him, yet he was the very Son of God. So he was heir to the throne of God. He was the King of the universe, yet he was lowly in stature. He willingly stepped into his role as a servant. So his greatness is derived from his servitude. James and John, the reason that Jesus addresses this issue and the reason for his focus on being a servant is that James and John had requested to be seated in a place of prominence. They asked that Jesus would seat one of them at his right hand and one at his left. And Jesus responds that in order to share in his kingdom, they must always also share in his sufferings. That they would have to drink the cup that he would drink. That Jesus will serve his disciples and subsequently serve all of mankind by drinking the cup of God's judgment. Jesus, the cup he would drink, he referred to, was the full cup of God's wrath poured out on sin. Jesus drank all that down. So the disciples are not to follow the pattern of the world. They're to follow the pattern of the Messiah. They're not going to be granted worldly authority. Their ranks as disciples will not progress up the ladder as men do in the world, or as Gentiles do. They, just as the Son of Man gave his life as a ransom for many, so they will give their lives in service of the gospel and in service of Jesus. So now, from this point forward, the cross now marks the way into entry, the way of entry into the kingdom of God. A person must die to self, which is the ultimate act of a servant, and continue to serve others. The old life, with its climb up the ladder and with its strivings to progress oneself or further oneself in one's agenda, must be laid down for the sake of the gospel. So God's way of considering considering others above yourself is now gospel. From the beginning of time and on through the Mosaic Law and throughout redemptive history, God, His way has been for a person to consider others above yourself. Well, now this is gospel. Jesus taught and modeled that in order to be great, you must lay down your life. Jesus laid down his life as an example and as a way for salvation. And now, so in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, God's pattern has now been solidified forever. So in our own lives, we need to hear the words of Jesus here. Following Jesus means serving. I think that's sometimes easy for us to forget. We're called to serve. We're saved to serve. Yet it goes against our nature and against our inclination to serve first. Yet Jesus served us first. We must learn to carry this out. This is not an option. This is foundational to being a Christian. Serving people is foundational to being a Christian. It's tied up in the very essence of being a Christian. Jesus, Mark chapter 10, verse 45 says that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. This is the very foundation of our faith. It is the establishment of our faith. Service in the kingdom is a way of life. This is not something that we do on one day a week, or that we do as a a box to check off or as an obligation. It's a way of life. It includes serving our families as Christ serves the church, but it goes way beyond that. Every day provides an opportunity to serve. We have influence in our workplaces. We have influence in our schools, our circle of friends. Everywhere we go, we have to learn to leverage this and sacrificially serve others. So the influence that God's given us, the place that we are in our lives, we have to learn to leverage that, choose to leverage that. And so service is a way of life, not simply an obligation. Service starts internally. Adopt the attitude that you will not consider yourself more highly than you should. Determine that you will put the needs of others before your own needs. And this is a choice now. So decide to become like Jesus. This is not something that comes automatic. This goes against our nature. So make the choice to be a servant. Make the choice to be like Jesus. So have you made the decision to be a servant like Jesus? Have you made the decision to be like Jesus, to be a servant? Have you passed someone in physical or spiritual need lately? And how did you feel when you passed that person? Do you look for ways to serve others daily? What are some ways you can demonstrate sacrificial service this week? And who in your life has modeled this Christ-like service to you in the past?